Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming on this freezing cold day. Glad no one got hurt on the way over. Susan is joining us from Chevy Chase, Maryland. She was recently living in Belmont 3 years ago, I think?
5 now.
5? Was it pre-COVID? Or
Yes, just before COVID.
just right before COVID, so we've known each other for a little while. Here was a little bit about Susan Suleiman. Susan Rubin Suleiman was born in Budapest and emigrated to the US as a child. She is the C. Douglas Dillon Professor of the Civilization of French Emerita and Professor of Comparative Literature Emerita at Harvard University, where she joined the faculty in 1981. She has numerous books. I will not mention them all here, but you'll be able to go to her website and take a look. Suleiman is also the author of 2 memoirs, Budapest Diary, In Search of the Motherhood, which was 1996, and Daughter of History, Traces of an Immigrant Girlhood, which was a finalist for a National Jewish Book Award in 2024. Susan has published over 100 articles in professional journals, as well as articles and reviews in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, Moment magazine, and other publications. Her book on the Hungarian filmmaker Istvan Szabo, which is Filmmaker Existential Choices, was published in February of 2024. Susan has won many honors, including fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Radcliffe Institute, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and the Central European University. In '90, she received Radcliffe's Medal for Distinguished Achievement, and in '92, she was decorated by the French government as an officer of the Order of Academic Palms. In 2018, she was awarded France's highest honor, the Legion d'Honneur. Welcome, Susan.
So anyway, thank you so much. I actually spoke at the Thursday morning talks many years ago about one of my other books, and it's nice to be back. As you can see from the title, I'm going to talk about this latest book on the great Hungarian filmmaker Istvan Szabo, and I flashed it up on the screen. It's over here for anybody who wants to look at it. Harvard Bookstore has copies, among other places. But I put up 2 books because these 2 are actually quite close. The one on the left, is the memoir that Myra mentioned, which I wrote actually during the COVID pandemic when you had nowhere to go except within yourself. It's a memoir about my childhood in Hungary and also my family's immigration over a year and a half of wandering to the United States and how I became an American. But I mentioned it because the 2 books are really quite closely linked in my mind, and in the fact that Szabo and I have certain things in common. We were both, he lives in Budapest, and my family left, but we were both young children. We're almost the same age. He's a little bit older than I am. During World War II, and not only young children, but young Jewish children, which meant that we were, we knew what it meant to be, have to hide. Let's put it that way. In fact, I interviewed him quite a few times in Budapest. This was when I first started my research back in 2017. And, this is what he looks like these days. He just celebrated his 87th birthday. He was born in 1938 into a well-to-do Jewish family where his maternal grandparents were still lighting Shabbat candles on Friday night. But his own parents converted to Catholicism before he was born, possibly, or very probably, because of the increasingly hostile anti-Semitism that prevailed in Hungary after the First World War. Conversion offered no protection, however, as we know, once the Nazis invaded Hungary in the spring of 1944. They invaded very late because Hungary was an ally of Germany, actually, but by the spring of 44, the Hungarian leader wanted to leave the alliance, and Hitler invaded. Also, Hitler wanted to get his hands on the Hungarian Jews, of whom there were about 500,000, close to 500,000 were deported in a fairly short period of time. Anyway, so when the Nazis invaded Hungary, conversion was no longer a protection. And Szabo's father, who was a doctor at the city hospital in a small town where they lived, had to move the family to Budapest, where he was put in charge of a Catholic hospital that also functioned as a hiding place. Szabo spent some time separated from his parents as a hidden child, and this is the most dramatic thing for him, was that his father died during the last days of the war after contracting diphtheria from a patient. And Szabo often talks about what it was like for him and for others of his generation whose fathers died in the war to grow up fatherless. One never quite gets over it, he once told me. Szabo grew into adolescence in the harshest years of the communist regime in Hungary under the Stalinist leader Rákosi, Mátyás Rákosi. He was accepted into film school, the highly competitive Film and Theater Academy, in 1956, just in time to witness the October 1956 uprising as a student. I'm sure many of us remember that. In its early years, the new regime after 56, the Kadar regime, was extremely harsh as well. So as the government sought to root out and punish those that it considered counter-revolutionaries, Szabo and two of his classmates were arrested by the secret police a few months after the uprising and blackmailed into becoming informants, writing reports about fellow students and professors at the Film Academy. This was quite common. One of the awful things about the communist regime is that it often forced people to become agents, even if they didn't want to, but they threatened them with various things. So a few years later, these young people, they were like 18, were disenrolled from being agents just as suddenly as they had been enrolled. But the whole experience, as you can imagine, left a huge mark, and certainly it did on Szabo. This part of his life remained a secret for many years, but in 2006, after the state archives were opened, after the fall of communism, he was outed by a journalist, and this caused a huge scandal in Hungary, and not only in Hungary, the New York Times reported on it as well, because Szabo was venerated by then as a world-renowned filmmaker and a man of great integrity, who had been making films for many years about characters facing difficult personal choices. A few critics jumped on this crucial event in his life to suggest that all of his films were nothing but disguised autobiographies focusing on problems of collaboration and betrayal. But I feel strongly that it would be a mistake to reduce his films in this way. What makes him a truly interesting and important filmmaker is that he treats themes of general significance that speak to a wide audience. And by the way, has anyone here seen any, like Mephisto? Have you seen a film called Mephisto? Great. How about Sunshine? Yeah, well, you have some great treats ahead of you because a lot of his films are available on Amazon Prime, and I'll give you a list of those that are, and they're really fabulous films. Mephisto won the Oscar for Best Foreign Film, actually. So anyway, as I say, his films speak to a wide audience. They're not just disguised autobiographies. And his early films in Hungarian spoke in particular to his contemporaries in a very personal way. One Hungarian critic wrote about his very first feature film. After seeing it, he said, "In the film's protagonists, I saw myself, my own generation on the screen." And Szabo was just 26 when that film was released in 1964, and he immediately became known as a leader of the Hungarian New Wave. Remember the New Wave in the French cinema. So, speaking of generations, Szabo is very conscious of the importance that the war had for him and for all those of his generation. In one of his very first interviews, when he was in his 20s, he said, quote, "My generation, even though we were barely 8 years old when the war ended, is a generation wounded by war. Half of my friends lost their fathers in the war. I did too. No more war." So I told you it was a big thing for him. And this statement points to what became one of his permanent themes throughout all of his films. That history, or history with a capital H, a collective history of a group or a nation, determines people's individual lives in ways that they cannot control. And in a 2005 interview, he told a journalist, he said, "I don't believe there is a single family in Hungary whose fate was not influenced by what happened in Hungary over the past century. What has preoccupied me until now, and what still preoccupies me, is how a politics governed by ideology interferes in people's lives." In the subtitle of my book, I call Szabo a filmmaker of existential choices. What is an existential choice? Well, the notion that individuals, even under the pressure of collective history, are confronted with personal choices that will affect their lives in major ways is a staple of existentialist philosophy. We find it, from Kierkegaard on, really. We find it in Nietzsche, Sartre, Camus, and contemporary philosophers, too, like the Hungarian philosopher Agnes Heller. Whom do I love? Whom should I marry? What kind of work should I do, and how should I prepare for it? What are my core allegiances? Who are my closest friends? These are existential questions because how we resolve them determines who we are. One reason why I'm so interested in Szabo's work is that he seems to me to be a filmmaker of existential choices. He places his characters in situations of historical crisis and shows them to us as they struggle with the choices that confront them, and once a choice is made, with its consequences. In my book, I discuss 4 such choices that occur in Szabo's work, starting with one that he and others of his generation lived with for many years. He started making films, as I mentioned, in the early 60s, when the Cold War was part of everyday life for Eastern Europeans. A situation that didn't end until 1989, as you know, when the Berlin Wall fell. So whether to leave or to stay was a question that people behind the Iron Curtain could ask themselves quite often. Do I want to stay in this country? Now, leaving a communist country during those years was not easy, especially for ordinary people, who had no particular reason to be sent abroad. But opportunities existed even for them. And in Hungary, the opportunities became huge for a short while after the failed uprising of October 1956, when around 200,000 people left the country. That's more than 2% of the population, a huge number. As you know, the uprising was put down by Soviet tanks, but for a brief period, the Austrian border was open, and many thousands, especially young people, streamed through it. According to one writer, this is this guy writing, quote, "In the late fall of 1956, there was not a single family in Hungary in which the to leave or to stay question did not arise. It was an existential question par excellence, for it implied not only a definitive leave-taking from home, but the choice of a whole new life and self. And there, by the way, is a big difference between Szabo and me, because as I mentioned, my family left, although we left even before that in 1949, whereas he and his mother stayed in Budapest. So now I just want to, before getting on to some good film clips, I want to show you a list of his major films so you can see quite a large number. I don't know. It's hard to read them on the screen, but I've put up in red the ones that are available on Amazon Prime, and I really highly recommend that you see some of these films. Very easy to see. Mephisto is the first one that I would recommend. Colonel Redl also. These are German films but with subtitles. Then there's a Hungarian film from 1980 called Confidence, which is one of the only ones in Hungarian that are available on Amazon Prime, and a few wonderful English language films. Meeting Venus, which is a kind of a fairly optimistic film made after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and Sunshine, which is like an historical epic film about the history of Jews, a single Jewish family in Budapest, in Hungary, for over a 100-year period. It stars Ralph Fiennes and William Hurt and all these marvelous English-speaking actors. And Taking Sides from 2001, which is a wonderful film with Harvey Keitel, highly recommended. And The Door, which is another Hungarian film based on a novel by Magda Szabo, which some people have read. She's no relation to Istvan Szabo. So anyway, enough talking. Let's look at a few clips from Szabo's films. Let's start with the question of to leave or to stay. This question comes up in Szabo's very first feature film, which is called The Age of Daydreaming, but only briefly in what I call between parentheses, because it was a very, in the middle of a dialogue, somebody says, "Oh, why didn't you leave in 1956?" And then they mention this for about 15 seconds, and then it goes on. So that's what I mean by between parentheses, because at that time, it was a very delicate question. In the early 60s, people who had left were considered traitors by the communist government. So, you didn't want to talk about it too much. But in his third film, from 1970, Szabo brought it right up front. It's called Love Film. Unfortunately, it's not available for streaming, but unless somebody can find it somewhere, but it's a great film. And it's in this film that he really explored the question of leaving or staying, because the two main characters made different choices. They're Janci, who's the boy, young man, and Kata are childhood sweethearts who meet again as young adults shortly before 1956 and fall in love. They've loved each other since childhood. But Kata leaves the country in 56 and Janci stays, and that makes all the difference. Here is a sequence about 1/3 of the way through the film, which we can talk about in a minute. Wait, let's see.
Én most elmegyek, Jancsi. Most indulok, nem jössz biztosan? Egy mélytelemben van néhány ismerősöm. Onnan majd eljutok valahogyan. Nem jössz, Jancsi? Nem jössz biztosan? Én most elindulok. Most ebben a percben, hogy ledettem a telefont. Nem jössz? Szervusz, Jancsi. Én most elindulok. Szervusz.
Okay. So, by the way, were you able to see the subtitles or not? They kiss each other on the street, and the next thing we see is is the phone ringing, and Kata is telling Yonchi, I am leaving, Yonchi, I'm leaving right now. I'm going to cross the border. Come with me, won't you come with me? And he says no. And then she says, goodbye, Yonchi, see you. So this is a really wonderful moment, because one thing that Szabo shows is how sudden these decisions are. I mean, we see them kissing, see you later on the street, and the next thing he knows is she's leaving, which shows you how existential choices are sometimes made on the spur of the moment, without even having thought about it. Kierkegaard calls this the leap. You leap into an existential choice. So this little sequence is so important that Szabo plays it twice in the film at different moments, as flashbacks. This was the moment where everything changed for them. The action of the film actually begins 10 years later, when things are a little bit more relaxed, people can travel a little bit more, and so Yonchi is on his way to visit Kata in France, because she has now settled in a small town in France. And much of their early life under communism is shown as flashbacks while he is sitting in the train. And a lot of the story takes place in their reunion, but we'll see. But the title, Love Film, is actually somewhat ironic or bittersweet, because although the story is definitely about love, because Yonchi and Kata have loved each other for a long time and are very happily reunited in France, but the film is also about the impossibility of their love, because neither one will change course. And so they have no future together. There can be no happily ever after when the two members of a couple are separated by their existential choices, right? He will not move to France. She will not go back to Hungary. And this is beautifully brought out, the impossibility, in a way, as well as the love, when in a scene on a beach where Yonchi and Kata have gone for a few days during his visit. And let's just take a look. I hope you can read the subtitles.
Ha kinyújtanám a kezem a ház felé, Kata combjágozott kezéhez érnék, mert itt Kata van és a tenger. Akkor is, hogy én behunyom a szemem, mindig a tenger. Ha én nem leszek itt, nélkülem is tenger. Kinyitom a szemem, és itt a tenger, hó, Kata keze. Ha úgy akarok, behunyom a szemem, és előttem a tűzoltó utca van. Hakló bácsi háza, a számtáblal kapunk, eljegyzom átszáblán fekete számot. 18 vagy 19 talán, a számot nem látok pontosan, képtelen vagyok látni a számot, hiába akarom. Én most a házra nézek és látom a nénit, pedig a néni meghalt már 2 éve. Látom Hakló bácsit kijönni, bezárni a kaput. Beláttam a kertbe az üveggömb botokra. Látom az üzlet kirakatát, a rengeteg apró porcelándísszel, ami nem eladom. De aki most ránéz a házra, látja a számot is, és megfoghatja a párkányt. Kinyitom a szemem, előttem a vibráló tenger és Kata. És most megérintem Katát.
Mi van?
Semmi. Ha otthon behunyom a szemem, és ott lesz a tenger előttem, Kata keze, és én megérintem Katát behuny szemmel, ő majd nem válaszol. Ez hát a kapcsolat a tenger és a tűzoltó utca között. Csak annyi, hogy én benne maradnak, ha kinyitom vagy ha behunyom a szemem. És úgy látszik, nem foghatunk meg egyszerre mindent, amit látunk magunk előtt.
So the way he cuts, I don't know if that was clear. He's on the beach. He's touching Kata. There's the sea, but then we have this alternation because we also see a slightly rundown, pockmarked still with signs of shooting during World War II and 1956. This old, rundown apartment building in Budapest, which is where Janci lives, but that's his home, you know. So what this scene is showing that, and he says it, I cannot be in both places at once. In other words, I'm here on the beach, and I close my eyes and I see my home, my house back home, and when I'll be home, I'll close my eyes and I'll see Kata on the beach, but I cannot bring them together except in my mind. So you know, it's a wonderfully visual way of suggesting that there's no way to bridge this gap between them. So that's why I say that the film is, Love Film is kind of an ironic title, but it's a wonderful film. Now, the second existential choice, oh wait, we don't have to, okay, never mind. The second existential choice that I discuss resonates for many of us today, which is to collaborate or not to collaborate with an authoritarian regime. That is the question. In the 1980s, Szabo made 3 films in German, all of them starring the wonderful actor Klaus Maria Brandauer, and all of them dealing in some way with this question. The first one was Mephisto, which, as I told you, won the Oscar for Best Foreign Film. He was the first filmmaker from Hungary to win that Oscar, by the way. And this Mephisto came out in 1981. And it's just a marvelous film, which I hope you'll have a chance to stream. It tells the story of a talented and ambitious actor in Germany who sells his soul to the devil, whence Mephisto, right, by accepting various honors from the Nazis and becoming their spokesman for the arts. By an ironic twist, the actor's most famous role is that of Mephistopheles in Goethe's Faust. So on the stage, he plays the devil, and very beautifully. He's a very talented actor. But in real life, of course, he is the Faust figure. He's the one who sells his soul to the Nazis. And here is an absolutely stunning, I think, scene from the film where we see the actor, Höfgen, his name is, where he meets for the first time the Nazi general who becomes his patron. This meeting occurs during the intermission in the play when Höfgen is still wearing his stage makeup as Mephisto.
Guten Abend, Herr Höfgen. Der Herr Ministerpräsident lässt Sie in seine Loge bitten. Ja. Alles wie geschmiert.
Darf ich dir meinen hervorragenden Kollegen Höfgen vorstellen?
Unser Christophilus.
Gratuliere. Diese Maske ist perfekt, sie ist das Böse selbst, diese Maske ist das heilige Böse. Der beste Blick doch aus der Nähe so mild. Und die weiche Händedruck ist Höfgen eigenartig. Aber das scheint das Geheimnis der Schauspielkunst zu sein. Kraft und Geist zu zeigen, während man in Wirklichkeit schwach ist. Naja. Ich kann mir vorstellen, dass Sie sich außerordentlich gründlich auf diese Rolle vorbereitet haben.
In meinem ganzen Leben, Herr Ministerpräsident.
Richtig, so geht es. Das ist das Geheimnis der Größe. Machen Sie weiter so, Mephistopheles.
So this is really quite an extraordinary moment in the film. For one thing, look, the use of close-ups, which is very characteristic of Szabo's work. You also saw it in the earlier clip. You know, he really works a lot with actors because he thinks, he's explained to me many times that the face of the actor can express a huge range of emotions without any single word being said. And here you could see the way the two men size each other up, you know, and the patron, the Nazi, who seems rather nice in this regard, but he turns out to be, he's a very evil man. But, you know, you can, and Höfgen's face, which actually is somewhat inscrutable. You know, he's an actor. You can never be sure exactly what he's thinking. But so it's wonderful what he does with close-ups. But the other great thing about this scene, I think, is that Szabo is playing around with the idea of theater and play acting, because what you notice is that when the people come, they're in the box, and when the people come back from the intermission, when the playgoers come back, instead of looking at the stage, they're all mesmerized looking up at the box because they recognize, you know, the important general, prime minister, sitting there with the actor, and so suddenly they are the ones that are the object. They are performing. And Höfgen raises his arm, you know, with his red cape. So he and the general both kind of perform their meeting for the people down below. And so Szabo really emphasizes this as everybody is turned up toward the box instead of getting ready to look at the stage. As we know, you know, the Nazis attached great importance to performance. They mounted huge spectacles, you know, like the Nuremberg rallies were basically performances. So Szabo is, I think, to some extent alluding to that, but he's very interested in general in the whole concept of play acting. So now the third existential question, I don't want to talk for too long because there may be some good discussion, I hope, but I'll just quickly say that the third one is a really big subject, though. It's the chapter in the book is called "To Be or Not to Be Jewish: Identity as Choice or as Fate." In other words, if you are born Jewish in Hungary, can you ever stop being it? This is still a meaningful question today, but it was a huge existential question for Jews in Europe during the decades before World War II. Could they be both loyal citizens of Germany, France, or Hungary and still retain their identity as Jews? What exactly was their relation to the Christian majority? And even if they chose to leave Jewishness behind, to convert, would the anti-Semites ever accept them? This is the question of assimilation, the so-called Jewish question, which first arose around the middle of the 19th century. And anti-Semites, as we know, had their answer to the Jewish question. A Jew could never be 100% German or French or Hungarian. But what's really interesting is that Jews, too, struggled with what I've called the Jewish question for Jews. Who am I? Where do I belong? One rarely sees this question raised as a question, in other words, as a serious personal issue in Hungarian films, or in films anywhere, I think, actually, but certainly in Hungary, even today. And during the communist years in Hungary, the issue of Jewish identity could not be raised at all explicitly because, according to the communist orthodoxy, religion and religious identity were totally irrelevant. You know, we were all communists together. This was, of course, a myth, but you could not publicly talk about issues of religion. The word Jew could never be written in a newspaper during the communist years. And even talk about the persecution of Jews during the Holocaust was taboo for many years because the communist narrative was that World War II was an anti-fascist struggle. So you didn't want to sort of single out, the persecution of Jews. We were, all fighting Hitler as anti-fascists. Szabo is actually unique among Hungarian filmmakers because he actually raised the Jewish question for Jews, the question of identity, even in his early films. Although in the early films it was always between parentheses, fairly quickly. But after the fall of communism in 1999, he made a great epic film about a Jewish family in Hungary that places the Jewish question at its center. This is Sunshine, starring Ray Fiennes, and the film was immediately dubbed into Hungarian. The film won many awards, by the way. It was won the best film in Canada. It was a Canadian production, Canadian-Hungarian production. Ray Fiennes won, for Best Actor all over the place. And as I think I mentioned earlier, it tells the story of a single Jewish family from the late 19th century to the late 20th. So it begins with the patriarch, Emanuel Sonnenschein is his name, who leaves his native village in the late 19th century and makes his way to Budapest, where he becomes a successful businessman. He starts a distillery. This is a good time for Jews in Hungary because they could be both Jewish and Hungarian, at that time, in the last days of the Habsburg Empire. And Emanuel is able to send his two sons to university. The older one becomes a judge. The younger one becomes a doctor. This was part of the Habsburg Empire's so-called tolerance of religious minorities. Ignaz, the older son, played by Ray Fiennes, becomes very loyal to the empire because of that. His idea is, this is a regime that allows Jews to advance, and, we have to support it. His brother Gustav, on the other hand, is a doctor, and he sees a lot of misery in the slums where he works, and so he thinks the empire is kind of rotten. The brothers Gustav becomes a revolutionary socialist. The brothers, as well as the woman that they both love, who is their cousin, change their name around 1900 from Sonnenschein to Schorsch, which is more Hungarian sounding, because somebody tells Ignaz, you can't be a Hungarian judge with a German name like Sonnenschein, which really means with a Jewish name like Sonnenschein. So he changes it to Schorsch, which means fate. And of course, the fate that they're hoping for is that they will be happily assimilated as Jews in Hungary. Unfortunately, that doesn't quite turn out that way, because by the next generation, things are bad. After World War I, there was a lot of anti-Semitism, even conversion didn't do much good. The second generation, the son of Ignaz, also played by Ray Fiennes. He plays three generations. The next generation, his son becomes an Olympic fencer, and he converts to Catholicism because it's the only way he can join the army officers' fencing club. And is a real Hungarian patriot, he's like totally in it, I'm for Hungary. He becomes an Olympic fencer and wins the gold medal at the 1936 Olympics in Berlin for Hungary. So he is like totally in it, as it were, in this whole idea of, here I am, I'm Hungarian, I represent Hungary. Unfortunately, Hungary by then was becoming really anti-Semitic, and Adam persists in being totally blind to this. He has a chance to leave, yet another chance to leave the country, but he says, no, I'm staying right here. I'm a Hungarian patriot, I'm a champion. and he gets brutally murdered in a forced labor camp during the war. So it's a pretty dramatic. It's one of the great scenes, I think, in cinema. If you ever Sunshine, you can definitely see. I really think you will love it. It's 3 hours long, but it will just fly by, and the time will just fly by. I don't know if we have time. I don't think. Oh well, let me see. Do you want to see a little clip from it or not? Yes? Well, in this clip, what we have is the first generation, that is Ignaz, the guy who's loyal to the empire, and his brother Gustav, the doctor, and you'll see how they fight about, oh wait, where are we? I think this will do it, hopefully. Yeah, this is in English.
There's information about that you're part of a conspiracy intent on overthrowing the monarchy.
What conspiracy? What information, sorry?
Oh, God.
Well, I've had no part in any conspiracy. Don't lie to me, Gustav.
Keep your voice down. Mama and Papa will hear you.
Oh, maybe they should be invited in. Their house might be searched. Their precious son, the doctor, might be arrested. The only thing that's keeping you and your friends out of prison is liberal tolerance. Liberal tolerance? Is that some sort of joke? You mean tolerance for misery and hunger, for watching hundreds of thousands of workers sink into poverty?
Is this the kind of speech you make at rallies? And where on earth do you get the nerve to go against the very empire that allows a Jew like you to become a doctor?
A Jew like you?
Exactly, without the emperor, you'd still be selling herbal tonic door-to-door like our grandfather.
You only believe in this fairy tale emperor out of pure greed.
I believe in a strong judicial system and the right to assimilate into the country I love.
You'll never be accepted here. You'll always be treated with suspicion. Only the workers will.
Yes, the workers
share a common end, exploitation. And you dream of a common goal, revolution.
No battery and you Jewish property wants to destroy everything.
No, I want freedom. And for freedom, one must fight.
Let the blood flow?
Yes, please. Let it flow.
Okay, oh wait, we want to stop this, sorry. Oh, okay. Well, so I don't know if you could hear this, but the argument was, Ignaz says, how dare you, you're part of a conspiracy against the empire, and Gustav says, yes, because I think it's horrible, and Ignaz says, it's what allows a Jew like you to become a doctor. And Gustav then starts screaming and saying, a Jew like me, what's wrong with you? It's really horrible. Only the workers are in favor, are the good people. Now, actually, that's not true. There was a lot of anti-Semitism among the working class as well. But Gustav has this idea that, if only the revolution could come about, then anti-Semitism would go away as well. But you could really sort of see the dramatic way that again, by the use of close-ups, that Szabo is able to raise this question. And that's the thing about him, I think, that is so good, that he's really able to find dramatic ways to raise these large questions by focusing on individuals, and yet we always see the weight of history behind them, World War I plays a huge role in Sunshine, and so does the Holocaust, so does World War II and communism. So that's the thing about him that is such a wonderful thing. Now, he actually raised the issue of Jewish identity and sort of the problems of it, even in one of his earliest films, which was very unusual. I mean, nobody did it then, and even since then, it really hasn't been raised very much. So now the question is, do you want to watch a 2-minute segment, because it's just an incredible segment from his early film, Uppa, or should I stop right now? What would you like me to do? What? Yes? Okay. All right. Well, so this is from a black and white film, his second film, which won a bunch of prizes. It's called Father. And you'll see the actor here, is the same actor as in the film that I showed you, Love Film. He used the same actor in his early films to portray the young man who was of his generation, born in 1938. So in this segment, this man, Taco, and his friends become extras in a film that's being made in Budapest. And that film, no such film was being really made at the time, but Szabo imagines a film in which you see Jews with yellow stars being herded across a bridge, the chain bridge in the middle of the city. And these young people are extras, but see what happens in this. This is quite a scene, no? Did you understand what happened here? First of all, this is quite a scene. What is happening, first of all, the film director is quite a dictator himself, keeps telling people to go back and start again. Don't laugh, this is serious, don't laugh, So the whole question of, can you really recreate a horrible moment in the past with people who didn't experience it. But of course, the really outstanding event here in this scene is the moment when the director says, no, we need another arrow cross. Now, the arrow cross were Hungarian Nazi thugs, basically, who in the last months of the war, they behaved just atrociously. If any of you have seen The Music Box, a great film, an American film, but what they were doing is they were herding Jews to the Danube and shooting them into the river. So these arrow cross were not nice people. But in the film, he says, we need another arrow cross to, herd the Jews, the so-called Jews. And so Taco, the main character who's wearing a Jewish star, suddenly is pulled out, the star is taken off, they put on the hat, they give him a gun, and they say, okay. So the question is, how do you tell a Jew? What's the difference between a Jew and a true Hungarian, including a vicious anti-Semitic Hungarian? So even though in some way what this is also asking, filmmaking is like as Szabo often says, films cheat. You can, create illusions with film. But what it's really asking, I think, how can you tell, is there really a difference between Jews and non-Jews? So it's a deep question, and I don't have time for that, but right after this, there's a wonderful scene where Tuckle and his friend, a young woman, walk along the Danube bank, right near where Jews were being shot into the water 20 years earlier, and she says, my father was killed in a concentration camp, and I sometimes don't want to say it. I don't want to say I'm Jewish. How can I be both Jewish and Hungarian? Can't I just be simply Hungarian? She has a real anguished monologue about what it means to be a Jew in Hungary, and at that time anyway. And so, but as I say, this was in 1966. Very, very, very no other filmmaker was asking these questions. So there's a fourth question I deal with in my book, but I'm not going to tell you. You have to buy the book. And I hope you will, and we have 5 minutes left. Thank you.
My question is, when you met with Szabo, how did he justify his own collaboration?
Szabo really doesn't want to talk about it. He rightly, you really have to understand. I mean, right after the fall of the wall, what turned out is that in a lot of the communist countries, half the country was being asked to inform on the other half. I mean, you've read in East Germany especially, I think in some families it turned out that the husband was an informant who was writing reports about the wife. I mean, we have no idea what it's really like to live. Well, maybe we're getting an idea of what it's like to live in a totally dictatorial regime where one person decides or one entity decides how people will live. So in the Kadar era, some people actually were informants because they were communists. They wanted to inform on other people. They were convinced communists. But many, many, many people were blackmailed into it. That is to say, although Szabo refuses to discuss it, but it's clear what happened is he was arrested with two of his classmates when they were coming out of the theater for no reason, taken to the police station and to the Secret Service. And clearly they must have said something like, either you do this or you're out. We're going to throw you out of the Film Academy and throw you in jail. Now, he could have said, yes, I'll be a martyr. Throw me out of the Film Academy and put me in jail. I am not going to be an informant. They wouldn't have killed him by that point. But okay, so very few people would have that kind of courage, I think, or whatever. So he and the other two, they all more or less accepted to do this. And a few years later, and they did. They met with a guy, every few weeks, who would ask them to give the report. What's the atmosphere in the Film Academy? Is anyone saying bad things about, about the regime? Was anyone involved in the uprising? That kind of thing. And as far as we know, nobody got arrested as a result of this informant thing. But I don't think that Szabo owes us an explanation necessarily. Read their history books. I mean, this is one of the awful things about a dictatorial regime. And I would like to remind you that even in our own country, wasn't there something recently about how you were asked to inform if other people in your office were involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion or something? I mean, it's very easy to turn people against other people. That's all I can tell you. He won't discuss it. Yeah. Anybody else?
That's great. I have so many new movies to watch. You guys,
I do hope you get to, go home and watch Sunshine. I think you will love Sunshine. And Mephisto. I think Nancy, who's seen quite a few of them, which one is your favorite?
Mephisto was the first one I saw.
Well, why don't you, can you give her the
Julia, can you give her the microphone, please?
I actually saw Mephisto in high school long before I met Susan, and then she told me she was writing this book about this director I've never heard of, and I said, oh my gosh, I've seen Mephisto. Anyway, but I would recommend you see Sunshine. It's in English. The acting is excellent, and it is long, but it's well worth it. And then if you really like it, Mephisto is in Hungarian or German?
German.
German. So we speak German, it's great, but I would say Mephisto's a better film, but Sunshine would be a great introduction to Szabo if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, and he has worked with a lot of wonderful actors, like, as I said, Brandauer, the star of Mephisto, is just a fabulous actor. But he also worked with Glenn Close in this film called Meeting Venus, which is really quite a lovely sort of love story, but after the fall of communism. But always history is there in the background. So yeah.
We'll provide a list of the movies that you put up on board. We'll send the movies to everyone in the audience.
Oh,
so
great.
they have an opportunity
Wonderful.
to take a look. Thank you
Good.
very much.
Thank you.